I discovered everything from a tube of lubricating gel hidden deep in my wife's drawer, an item that only shows up when two people are still intimate. But we haven't been that way for a very long time, and even when I was younger and strong, I never needed it. So who was using it, and why was it there? Before I go on, let me have a dot. Tell me where you're listening to this story from, and if you want to follow it all the way to the very end, subscribe to the channel. It lets me know I'm not speaking into silence. I am David Coleman, 58 years old. I realized everything began to slip out of alignment on a very ordinary morning. Elaine, my wife, 52 years old, stood in front of the bedroom mirror with her back to me. She sprayed a light mist of perfume onto her wrist, rubbed both sides together, then tilted her head so the scent would settle behind her ear. I didn't need to ask to know it was the old bottle, the one she used years ago when we were still dating, when every time she left the house she would turn back and ask me if the scent was too strong. For nearly a decade that perfume had sat untouched in the drawer. Elaine once said the smell didn't suit her anymore, yet that morning it was back, deliberate and unmistakable. "You're up early?" she asked lightly without turning around. "Just building a habit," I said. "Yoga today?" "Yeah," a clipped answer, no details, no extras. Elaine reached for the phone on the vanity. The screen lit up for a split second and was immediately turned face down. A motion so practiced that if you weren't paying attention, you'd think it was unconscious. But I don't work on feelings. For 20 years managing operations and safety for hospital systems, I've lived by checklists. Everything has an order. When one small detail doesn't line up, it doesn't disappear. It sits there waiting to be looked at. We ate breakfast in a silence, just warm enough not to be called cold. Elaine texted while I poured coffee. Her fingers moved fast, and the corner of her mouth lifted slightly. I didn't look at the content, only the reflex. When I stepped closer, the screen went dark. She slipped the phone into her bag, as if tucking away something more private than necessary. "You coming home late today?" Elaine asked evenly. "I've got a safety review meeting tonight. Might run late." "Then I'll eat out. Yoga will probably wear me out." I nodded and didn't ask more since Hannah moved out after getting married. The house has felt strangely larger, quieter, everything still in its old place, but the life inside it changed. I'd grown used to that silence. What I wasn't used to was the feeling that something was happening behind my back that I wasn't invited to be part of. Lucas had been showing up more frequently over the past 2 months. My son-in-law, always with a reasonable excuse, checking the plumbing, looking over the back fence, borrowing tools, asking me about construction materials. And he chose his timing well, almost. Every time Lucas stopped by, I was either at the hospital or on the road to another facility. The one time I did run into him was when I came home early. Lucas was standing in the kitchen, holding my glass of water, talking to Elaine in a way that was far too relaxed. There was nothing wrong on the surface, but I noticed Elaine smiling in a way I hadn't seen in a long time. Not a polite smile, but the kind of unconscious reaction that happens when someone genuinely interests you. "Michael," Lucas said when he saw me, "I'm asking Elaine if I can borrow the ladder." "It's in the garage," I said. "Help yourself." He walked past me, and Elaine's perfume still lingered in the air. The two scents mixed together unpleasantly, but clearly enough for me to remember. That night, I opened my work notebook, an old habit. I wrote down the checkpoints for the meeting the next day, and when I reached the last line, I stopped. I didn't know why, but another list formed in my mind, unrelated to the hospital. Elaine using the old perfume, phone face down, yoga schedule changing, Lucas coming over when I'm not home. There was no conclusion, just data. Over the next few days, I did nothing out of the ordinary. I went to work, spoke to Elaine appropriately, kept our routine intact. If there was one thing I had learned in safety management, it was this. If you want the truth, don't let the system know you're observing it. Elaine started leaving the house earlier, some days when the air was still cool. Other days she didn't return until close to noon. The yoga schedule was inconsistent. When I asked, She said the studio had changed times. I didn't verify it, not yet. One Friday afternoon, I finished work earlier than expected. The meeting was postponed to the following week. I drove home without warning. It wasn't a plan. Just my habit of coming home early when I could. Lucas's car wasn't out front. I entered through the side door, set my bag on the chair. There were no voices, no strange sounds. Everything was appropriately quiet. Elaine was upstairs. I heard light footsteps. She was moving faster than usual, like she was tidying up. I stood in the kitchen for a few seconds, and then went up. "You're home early, huh?" Elaine said when she saw me in the hallway. She was wearing the dress I had bought her for our 20th wedding anniversary. I remembered clearly because I had taken a long time choosing it. "The meeting was postponed," I said. "Aren't you going to yoga?" "I changed the schedule," she replied. "I'm getting ready." We looked at each other for a few seconds. There was no argument, no question crossing a line. But I realized something. Elaine was watching my reaction, not out of concern, but to gauge it. That night, after Elaine fell asleep, I went downstairs for water. The light was only partially on. The house was familiar, yet something felt out of place. As I passed the bedroom, I suddenly remembered my reading glasses weren't where they usually were. I opened the top drawer of Elaine's dresser, thinking they might have slipped over to her side. Inside were familiar things: silk scarves, jewelry, a few miscellaneous items. I closed it and opened the drawer below. My hand touched something unfamiliar, not an everyday item, not something Elaine had a reason to keep here. I pulled it out slowly, just enough to see its shape in the hallway light. A tube of personal lubricant for marital relations, the kind sold at pharmacies, the packaging still new but nearly half gone. I stood frozen, loosely holding the tube, my mind spinning blankly for a few seconds. Even in our younger years, when my wife and I were still regularly intimate like any other couple, we had never used something like this. It wasn't our habit, not our need. Everything back then happened naturally, without assistance or extra preparation. And yet now, when age had long since pulled both of us away from the bedroom, that tube had appeared here in Elaine's drawer, and my son-in-law kept showing up during the exact windows when I wasn't home. It had been placed deep behind neatly folded fabric, not for easy access, but to avoid someone's eyes. That kind of hiding was not accidental. It showed deliberation, caution, and a clear awareness that this was something I was not meant to see. I didn't need any further explanation to understand that the lubricant did not exist for my marriage. I put it back exactly where it had been, adjusted each fold of fabric to look identical to before, not out of hesitation, but because I knew with certainty that from this moment on, everything had shifted onto a different path, and before saying a single word, I needed to see enough, hear everything, and understand the full truth of what was happening behind my back. For many years, I had believed my marriage might be quiet to the point of boredom, but at least it was safe. That night, for the first time, I understood that some things don't need noise to be powerful enough to destroy a foundation. I didn't name what I had just discovered. Not yet. I came home earlier than usual on a weekday afternoon. No warning, not because of any new suspicion. Work simply ended early, and I wanted to be home before it was time to cook dinner. Just as I turned off the engine, I saw the familiar pickup truck parked diagonally across the street. The paint on the rear bumper was faded, and a long scratch ran along the left side. I recognized it without needing a closer look. Lucas always parked that way, not exactly careless, but careless enough to show he didn't think he needed to be cautious. I didn't linger in the yard. I unlocked the side door with the spare key and stepped inside, closing it gently behind me. No voices downstairs, no smell of food, no sound from the television. The house was so quiet I could clearly hear the wall clock in the kitchen ticking in steady beats. I set my bag on the chair and took off my coat. As I reached the foot of the stairs, I heard a very faint sound from upstairs. I couldn't tell if it was a voice or a breath, just a low noise, enough to make someone stop. The hallway light upstairs was only half on. A warm yellow glow spilled out from the bedroom. The door wasn't fully closed. It was open just enough for someone standing outside to see in, as if whoever was inside believed no one could come home at that hour. Elaine stood beside the bed with her back to the door. She was wearing the familiar thin dress. Her left hand gripped Lucas's collar, pulling him close. It wasn't a hesitant touch. It wasn't an instinctive reaction. It was the movement of someone who knew exactly what she was doing. Lucas bent down. Elaine tilted her face up. Their faces were close enough that I didn't need to hear anything to know what was happening. Her hand slid down his back, holding him tightly, with no intention of letting go. The light in the room dimmed further, not by accident, a practiced touch on the switch. The space shifted into a kind of light meant only for two people. I stood frozen. There was no screaming in my head, no surge of rage. Instead, there was a deep, slow pain, as if someone had just taken away a part of the life I had lived for decades. My chest tightened. My breathing grew heavy. My hands went cold. I'd never imagined I would see my wife look at another man with that expression, the look I thought had disappeared only because of age. Elaine leaned in closer, her lips pressed against Lucas's neck. The door was pushed shut slowly. Not slammed, not rushed, just enough to block the light, but not enough to hide the truth that had just been exposed. I stepped back once, then another step. My legs trembled slightly. My heart beat so slowly I could hear every pulse. I felt myself age in that exact moment, not because of years, but because of being betrayed in the room I had once considered the safest place in my life. I didn't rush forward. I didn't open the door. I didn't call Elaine's name. I went back downstairs, grabbed my car keys, and put my coat back on. Every movement was slow, as if moving any faster would cause me to split in two. Outside, the evening wind brushed across my face. I took a deep breath, but it didn't make things easier. The pain was still there, clear, unnamed but undeniable. I understood very clearly. If I confronted them then, everything would shatter in a way I couldn't control, and I would never know the full truth. I got into the car and drove away, leaving the door that was still faintly lit behind. The road ahead was familiar, but the feeling inside me was no longer the same. In that exact moment, I understood that I had stepped into another phase of my life. I didn't need immediate answers, and I wasn't searching for explanations. I chose to step back and let every sign arrange itself into the clearest truth possible. From that moment on, I was no longer standing in the place of a betrayed husband. I was standing in the place of the one who sees everything. The next morning, Elaine woke up early. She put on her workout clothes, tied her hair neatly, stood by the door to check her phone, then slipped on her shoes. "I'm going to yoga," she said, her voice as calm as every other day. I nodded. The door closed, the lock clicking softly. I didn't move right away. I stood still in the middle of the living room for a few breaths, making sure I was fully awake. What I needed now wasn't more speculation, but something that could be kept, replayed, and compared. I needed the truth in the clearest possible form. I drove to a small electronics shop near my workplace. It wasn't crowded or noisy. I stated my needs directly. A compact voice recorder, long battery life, and voice activated. The clerk showed me a few options. I chose a simple one, no complications, easy to hide. After paying, I didn't open the box right away. I set it on the passenger seat and stared straight ahead at the road. When I got home, I did everything quickly but carefully. The bedroom looked the same as always. I stood in the exact spot as the day before, where the light had once spilled out, and the door had been left ajar. I chose a position close enough to catch voices, hidden enough not to be noticed. I ran a short test, checked the direction, and turned off the indicator light. Everything was fine. I left the house and locked the door as usual. Went to work, meetings, signing papers, answering emails. On the outside, I kept my old routine intact. On the inside, every minute moved more slowly. At the end of the day, Elaine texted, "I'll be home late. Go ahead and eat without me." I replied briefly. That night, after she was asleep, I didn't go upstairs right away. I poured myself some water and sat at the kitchen chair until my hands stopped shaking. Then I took the device into the small study at the back of the house. I closed the door, drew the curtains, put on the headphones. My finger rested on the play button. I paused. My heart was beating slowly but heavily, as if each beat carried weight. I took one deep breath, then pressed it. At first there were familiar sounds, a door opening, footsteps, a chair being pulled out. Then Elaine's voice came through, different from how she spoke to me, softer, closer. "You got here early?" she asked. I squeezed it in. Lucas replied, "We'll talk fast." There was a brief silence, long enough for me to realize they were standing very close to each other. Elaine continued, her voice lowered. "Everything is still in his name. The house, the insurance, the retirement accounts. If we don't change the approach, it'll take a long time." Lucas answered immediately, without hesitation. "No need to rush. Timing is what matters. I've checked his recent medical appointments. Fatigue, blood pressure, and some borderline indicators. We just need to give it a small push." Elaine asked, "Push how?" Lucas replied slowly, his voice steady, like he was reciting a carefully prepared plan. "At first, a pill that looks like his regular medication, a light dose so no one suspects anything. The body will get thrown off, gradually. Outwardly, it'll look like age catching up. After that, we add a few other things, stuff that, when combined, can trigger stronger reactions. The person taking it becomes more irritable, and the cardiovascular system takes more strain. Stretch it out over time, and the risk of a stroke or heart attack goes up, with the cause hard to trace. If doctors adjust something, we just switch labels, a little each week." Elaine was silent for a few seconds, then asked, "Will it leave traces?" "Hardly," Lucas said. "Not right away. And if it does, by then everything will be different. The paperwork will be done first." Elaine spoke even more quietly. "What about the investment accounts? Stocks, retirement funds, the cash in the safe?" Lucas answered, "I've gone through it. We move it in parts, break it up. When he gets weaker, his signature won't be scrutinized as closely. Life insurance is the key. If something happens, the money comes fast." I took the headphones off for a moment. My throat burned dry. I realized my hands were ice cold. It wasn't fear. It was pain, sharp and solid in my chest. I put the headphones back on. Elaine said, "What about the house?" Lucas replied, "When he's weaker, signing will be easier. Or we set up a power of attorney. If needed, we wait. Time is on our side." Elaine hesitated. "After that?" "Where will we live?" Lucas answered, his voice firm. "I'll move out. End my marriage completely. We'll live together, at least for a while. When everything's finished, we can leave. Change locations. No one needs to know too much." Elaine exhaled. "You're sure?" "I'm sure," Lucas said. "Just keep acting normal. Don't change your routine." He added, as if sealing the deal, "I'll be there with you. When it's over, you won't have to go back to your old life." No one laughed. No one joked. They spoke like they were discussing a business plan. My name came up like an item to be handled. When the recording ended, I sat there for a long time. I didn't slam the table. I didn't shout. I stared into the darkness in front of me and saw clearly that everything had changed. The woman I trusted, the man I allowed into my home, had together calculated how to take the life I had built. The pain didn't come loudly. It came slowly, piling up, making my chest feel crushed under the weight. I thought about the quiet dinners, the ordinary mornings, the years I believed silence meant safety. It turned out that silence had been hiding something else. I put the device into a separate drawer and locked it. I didn't sleep right away. I knew that from this point on, it was no longer suspicion. I had evidence, and I understood that to protect myself, I would need to prepare carefully, step by step. That night, I was no longer just someone who had seen. I had something to prove it. I had a mild medical history. Nothing serious, but enough that I had to take medication regularly every day. Cardiovascular issues, blood pressure, and a few indicators are no longer what they were in my 40s. Elaine knew this better than anyone. For years, she was the one who reminded me to take my pills on time, at the right dose. The habit ran so deep that I barely needed to look at the clock. After the night I heard the recording, I understood one thing very clearly. That very habit had made me an easy target to control. I did not jump to conclusions. I did not speculate. The first thing I did was seek confirmation from professionals, and not just one. That morning I went to see my family doctor as usual. I brought a list of the medications I was taking, explained my medical history and my recent symptoms. I asked directly, without beating around the bush, were there situations where medication could be altered or combined with something else that would cause strong reactions in the body, increasing the risk of cardiovascular disturbances or serious incidents? The doctor looked at me for a long moment before answering. He did not try to scare me, but he did not brush it off either. He said there were ways to interfere with the body that could push it in a dangerous direction, while remaining very hard to detect on the surface. If prolonged, the consequences could come suddenly. The most important thing was that patients must never take medications indiscriminately without a proper medical indication. I memorized every word. From that clinic, I did not go home right away. I went to another facility and saw an independent cardiologist. I did not tell any family story. I only presented my medical history, the medications I was using, and asked the same question. The answer was not identical word for word, but the meaning was the same. The risk was real, and extreme caution was required. 2 confirmations were enough. I returned home with a clear decision. I would not continue using the set of medications kept in the shared cabinet, but I also would not change my outward behavior. If I suddenly refused to take my pills, Elaine would notice immediately. I prepared a different set of medications, adjusted and monitored by doctors, stored in a private place only I knew. From that point on, my medication use happened quietly, unseen, untouched by anyone else. As for the old medication, I left it exactly where it was. Every day I still pick up the pillbox in front of Elaine, still perform all the familiar motions. But instead of swallowing them, I discreetly hid them and disposed of them later in a safe way. Everything followed the old rhythm, raising no suspicion. Elaine saw exactly what she expected. I was still taking my medication regularly. I was still moderately fatigued. I was still a man slowing down with age. But I knew the truth. My body was now protected. In the evenings, I wrote down every change, appointment schedules, doctor's opinions, treatment adjustments. I archived confirmation emails, documents, and notes. Not to use immediately, but so that when the time came, everything would have a clear and traceable origin. For the first time in many days, I felt myself regaining control, not through confrontation, but through preparation. I did not follow Lucas impulsively. I did it the way I had handled every important matter in my life, with distance, with boundaries, with clear objectives. I did not tail him closely, did not intrude, only stayed far enough away to see the whole picture. Lucas always left the house looking immaculate, shirt tucked in neatly, belt straight, shoes clean. He stepped out with the bearing of a man who knew he would be welcomed. No rush, no caution. Everything looked very familiar, like a routine repeated many times. His destinations caught my attention, not construction sites, not shops. They were houses in quiet residential neighborhoods. Lawns are neatly trimmed, thick curtains, cars are parked in the driveway. Places where the people inside were often older women, living alone, financially secure but privately lonely. Lucas entered those houses with polite ease. When he left, there were always very small changes. His shirt was no longer as crisp as when he arrived. His collar is slightly askew, his belt adjusted hastily. Sometimes he paused right on the front steps, tugged his shirt hem, smoothed his hair, and only then got into the car. I saw this more than once. The way Lucas spoke to those women was different as well. His voice lowered, slowed. His gaze lingered longer than necessary. His hand brushed lightly against their arm, close enough to create intimacy without drawing attention. Familiar gestures, repeated with exactness in many different places. I began memorizing the addresses, not out of curiosity, but because I recognized a pattern taking shape. Then I saw a familiar face. One afternoon, Lucas stopped his car in front of Margaret Lewis's house. I knew her, an American woman in her 60s. Her husband had died many years earlier, and her children lived far away. She participated in a few community activities, always carried herself with restraint, but everyone knew she possessed considerable personal assets. Lucas walked into Margaret's house with unsettling naturalness. Nearly 1 hour later, he came out. His shirt was buttoned wrong by one button. His sleeves had been rolled up and then hastily pulled back down. When he reached the gate, he turned back to say something more. Margaret stood in the doorway, one hand on the doorframe. Her expression flustered in a very familiar way, softened, trusting. That moment was enough for me to understand what I was witnessing. These were not casual social visits. This was a deliberately repeated pattern, targeting lonely women with money who needed attention. Lucas loved none of them. He played exactly the role they needed, the listener, the man who made them feel seen, a presence sufficient to blur the emptiness inside the house. Elaine was not a special case. She was simply more convenient than the others, because she had a husband, had shared assets, had a life that appeared stable. When I realized that, the sense of betrayal no longer dominated me. In its place was clarity. If this were a pattern, then it had weaknesses, and if I wanted to end this, I could not look only at my marriage. Lucas believed he was controlling everything, but from that moment on, I understood exactly how he operated and what he was doing. I went to see them with verified facts, not speculation. I stated my purpose from the start, because I understood very clearly that if I spoke even one evasive sentence, the door would close immediately. Right at the beginning, I made one thing clear. I was not there to cause a scene, and I asked them not to react hastily. I needed cooperation, not anger. The first was Margaret Lewis. When she opened the door, I looked straight at her and spoke slowly, each word clear enough to leave no room for misunderstanding. I'm Elaine's husband. Lucas, the man who often comes to your house, is my son-in-law. She froze. Several seconds passed without anyone speaking. I could clearly see the confusion spread across her face, as if something familiar had just been pulled out of its proper place. She shook her head very slightly, the reflex of someone not ready to accept what she had just heard. I need to continue, I said. He is having an affair with my wife, and I need to confirm one specific thing. Has he ever borrowed money from you or asked you for it? I added immediately, clearly enough for her to understand my intent. If the answer is yes, please stay calm. I am not asking you to do anything right now. Margaret sat down on the nearest chair, her movements slow and heavy. She raised a hand to her forehead and let out a long breath. That's impossible, she said quietly. He told me I was the only one. I did not argue. I did not explain further. I only asked for the number. She was silent for quite a while, as if weighing what saying it out loud would change. Then she spoke, her voice steady but dry. At first it was a few hundred, then a few thousand, then more. She looked up, her eyes red but without tears. Almost 40,000. Some transfers, some cash. I asked again, very slowly. What did he promise you? Margaret let out a small laugh, a smile with no trace of joy. He said he would be with me. Said his marriage existed in name only. Said I was the one he chose. She paused, looking down at her hands resting on her knees. He talked about a peaceful future. said once he got through a difficult phase, everything would be fine. I believed him, because at that time, I wanted to believe. I told her what I had come to ask. I don't want you to do anything rash. I only ask for your cooperation. Keep the documents, the emails, and tell the truth when the time comes. If you agree, we will do everything the safe way. Margaret looked at me for a long time. Then she nodded. I'll cooperate, she said, because I know now that I was betrayed. I left Margaret's house with the first confirmation heavy enough that there was no turning back. A few days later, during my surveillance, I met the second woman. I chose a moment just as she arrived home, when everything still felt natural. I introduced myself exactly as before, without adding or omitting a single detail. When she heard that Lucas was my son-in-law and was having an affair with my wife, she stood rigid, as if held in place. That's not what he told me, she said immediately, her voice tight. He said he needed money to buy equipment. Then he needed more to keep the business running. Every time he promised, he would pay it back soon. I asked for the number. She recited it clearly without looking at any papers. 15,000 the first time, 20,000 the next. Each amount came with a reason that sounded reasonable at the time. Each time came with reassurance that it was the final step. The final step toward what? I asked. She looked at me, eyes wide, her voice dropping. Toward a new life. He said he would leave his wife. He said he just needed one more amount, and it would be done. I raised my hand to signal her to stop, keeping my voice calm. Please don't call him. Don't text him. I need everything to remain as it is. If you agree, please cooperate with me. She sat quietly for a few seconds and then nodded. I agree, she said, because now I understand I'm just one part of this. 2 stories, 2 different people, the same approach. I needed no more examples to understand the larger picture taking shape. That evening I sat alone and arranged the pieces, small sums leading to larger sums, promises clearing the path for a plan, and at the end of that path, an amount of money large enough to disappear together. That was when I began to understand why Elaine was different. With the other women, Lucas extracted money, piece by piece, step by step. With my wife, he saw the big score, our shared assets, the insurance policies, everything that could be gathered once I was gone, several $100,000, maybe more. Compared to amounts of 10 or 20,000, it was a leap that only needed to succeed once. Realizing that, I felt cold, not from jealousy, but from the level of calculation. Elaine was not deceived the way the others were. She understood exactly where she stood in that plan, and she chose to stand on his side. Once everything was clear, I knew I could not stop at confirmation. I began collecting everything in full. Copies of it, transfers, emails, appointment records. I asked each woman to sign a written statement with her signature, clearly listing the amounts, the timing, and the promises she had received. They agreed to cooperate, because by then everyone understood that silence only benefited the person who had betrayed them. After the last woman signed the statement, I did not go home right away. I stayed in the car, parked in the empty lot behind the community center, a place with little foot traffic in the evening. The sun had already set. Streetlights came on one by one, bright enough to see the dashboard clearly, but not enough to make anyone feel at ease. I opened the file folder on the passenger seat, not to reread it, but to organize it, a professional habit. When things are pushed to a dangerous threshold, the only thing that keeps the mind from drifting is order. Real recordings, 2 segments, long enough, clear voices, content that could not be misunderstood. Victim statements, 4 women, different amounts of money, the same script, the same kind of promises, medical records, medication lists, appointment schedules, dosage adjustments, confirmation from 2 independent doctors. Each item alone was heavy enough. Placed side by side, they formed a chain that no one could call coincidence. I closed the folder. At that moment, I was no longer standing in the position of a betrayed husband. I did not see myself as the victim of a failed marriage either. What I was looking at was a plan that had been prepared long in advance, with coordination with a clear financial target and with an ending they believed would come soon. I thought about the moment if I were to walk straight into the house, put everything on the table, and demand an explanation. The outcome would be easy to predict. Elaine would cry. Lucas would deny everything. It would all shatter within minutes, and then the most important things would disappear in the chaos. I had seen enough cases like that in the hospital. Rash reactions rarely save anyone. They only push the situation out of control. Direct confrontation meant handing control over to emotion, and that was something I would not allow. I set very clear boundaries for myself. I would not kill anyone. I would not threaten anyone. I would not turn myself into the one standing in the middle of the storm. If there was to be an ending, it had to come from what they themselves had done, in front of others, and in a way that could not be taken back. A trap, if called by its proper name, had to meet several mandatory conditions. First, it had to be legal. No illegal entry, no dangerous fabrication, no real risk to anyone. I had spent my entire life preventing incidents, not creating them. Second, there had to be witnesses. Not just one person, but many, in different positions. When the truth exists only in a closed room, it is easily distorted. When it appears before a community, the story no longer belongs to one side. Third, there needed to be a reason for emergency intervention, not to cause panic, but to activate exactly the response society has already been trained for. Rescue, support, documentation. And finally, everything had to unfold in a way that could not be denied. No roundabout explanations, no gaps to say it was just a misunderstanding. When those conditions became clear in my mind, I realized how familiar I was with this kind of scenario. In the hospital, we always assume the worst case, then build procedures so that when it happens, people react according to trained instinct. I did not need to invent anything new. I only needed to apply what I understood best and place it in the right context. I drove home when the streets were already lit. Elaine was watching television in the living room, sitting in her usual posture as if today were no different from any other day. She looked up and asked if I had eaten dinner. I answered vaguely, not because I could no longer speak to her, but because I was maintaining the old rhythm until there was no need to maintain it anymore. That night, I lay awake for a long time, not because my mind was in turmoil, but because I was weighing a single thing. Hannah. She was grown, had her own family, her own life that I had always hoped was safe enough that she would never have to witness things like this. I imagined the moment if she were to stand before the truth, not through someone's telling, but with her own eyes. I asked myself whether I was pulling my child into an unnecessary wound. The answer came slowly, but clearly. Lies can keep the surface calm for a while, but they leave dark patches that people only notice when it is too late. The truth hurts immediately, but it does not continue to spread in silence. I did not want Hannah to live another 10 years, only to realize how she had been placed inside a fabricated script. That decision did not make me feel lighter, but it ended all hesitation. From that day on, I began preparing in the quietest way possible. No excessive shopping, no disruption of routine. I only chose equipment familiar from my work, safety training tools, fire drill equipment, emergency response activation systems. I planned every step that needed to be done, not to remember it, but so that when the time came, I would only have to execute it. Hesitation was the only thing that could ruin the plan. Elaine continued her pattern of leaving early and coming home late. Lucas continued to appear at exactly the times I was not around. That repetition helped me pinpoint the exact moment. One late night, when the house was quiet, I stayed in the kitchen, turning off most of the lights. I did not open the file, nor did I listen to the recordings again. I only did a final check of what I was about to do. When I stood up, I knew I had crossed the boundary of thought. I began to act. I started with the things most familiar to my line of work. In the hospital, every safety training session follows one clear principle. The equipment must be realistic enough to trigger the correct reflexes, but must never pose actual risk. I chose everything according to that rule. Nothing unfamiliar, no detail outside what I had used for years. The adhesive I prepared is normally used in emergency drills and medical incident response training. It is non-toxic and causes no dangerous reactions to the body. The key lies in its bonding mechanism. When it comes into contact with skin in a moist environment, especially one with mild alkalinity, its adhesion strength increases rapidly. This is not a surface-level stickiness that can be removed with water or force, but a deep bond that locks two surfaces together within seconds. In training scenarios, this adhesive is used to simulate severe skin entrapment situations, where the more the person struggles, the more sharply the pulling force intensifies the pain. The body reacts instinctively, but every movement only makes the contact area tighter and more inflamed. In that state, there is no safe way to separate oneself. Trying to pull it apart by hand only causes greater injury. Because of that property, once bonding occurs during intimacy, removal inevitably requires medical intervention, a specialized solution, precise technique, and sufficient time to prevent deep tissue damage. The more one struggles, the sharper the pain becomes, and the harder the situation is to control. In such cases, the natural reaction of anyone nearby is to call emergency services, and when the fire department arrives, they never work alone. This area has a dedicated medical response team that accompanies them from the outset to perform immediate clinical assessment. My daughter is part of that team. Her job is to appear when a situation has exceeded the ability to handle it privately, when someone with proper expertise is needed to determine each next step. I understand that mechanism very well. When a situation is forced into the open in front of first responders, under bright lights, before professionals, there is no room left for concealment or private negotiation. At that moment, the truth needs no guidance. It reveals itself, clearly and irreversibly. I did not bring the adhesive home right away. I left it in the trunk of my car for 2 days, as part of maintaining a steady routine. On the evening of the third day, when Elaine was fast asleep, I finally began. The hallway light spilled into the bedroom with just enough brightness. I opened the exact drawer I had seen last time. Everything was still in its original place. Neatly folded towels, a few familiar items, the tube of lubricant tucked deep inside. The arrangement showed that whoever stored it there was consciously avoiding other people's eyes. I put on thin gloves, the kind I still use when inspecting sensitive medical equipment. The movements were slow and precise. I took out Elaine's tube of lubricant first, unscrewed the cap, and poured all the remaining liquid into a specialized container. The fluid was clear, viscous, odorless, with a familiar color. I paused for a brief moment, just to be sure I remembered the original feel correctly. Then I opened the bottle I had prepared in advance. The solution inside had almost identical clarity and hue. I poured slowly, controlling the amount to match the original level exactly, so that the weight and feel in the hand would not change. When the cap was screwed back on, the tube returned to its familiar form, showing no sign of tampering that the naked eye could detect. I wiped the mouth of the tube clean and placed it back in its original position, deep behind the neatly folded fabric. I adjusted each fold to match exactly how Elaine always did it. If anyone opened the drawer, what they would see would only be a familiar item in the right place, in the same condition as every time before. When I closed the drawer, I checked the clock. 10:45 p.m. Elaine had messaged earlier in the afternoon that she would be going to yoga early tomorrow, the class starting at 7 a.m. Lucas would stop by to check the backyard fence, while I was at the hospital. That schedule was not new. It repeated often enough to become routine. I stood still for a few more seconds, not to reconsider, but to lock the timing into my mind. Tomorrow, somewhere between 9:30 and 10 o'clock. That was the window when Elaine usually came home to rest before going out to lunch. It was also when the neighborhood began to have people at home, but not yet enough to draw immediate attention. A gap just wide enough for everything to unfold at a natural pace. The next step was sound. I did not use a phone, nor did I make a manual recording. I used an artificial intelligence voice generation software the hospital had once tested for emergency guidance systems. I already had samples of Elaine's voice from previous calls, enough for the software to reproduce pitch and breathing patterns under stress. With Lucas, it was even simpler because his voice was low and steady. I generated only very short phrases. No location mentioned. No emergency services triggered. Just fragmented cries for help, enough for a listener to understand that something was wrong and that someone was trapped. Smoke was the final element. I had brought home a small smoke generator, the kind used for fire safety drills in enclosed hallways. The device produces no heat, no toxic odor, and causes no damage to property. It only creates a visual effect dense enough to make outsiders believe there is an incident inside. In the hospital, this type is used to test evacuation response, and I had supervised it directly many times. I tested the machine once in the garage at midday when the neighbors were at work. The smoke dissipated quickly. The home fire alarm system was not triggered. That was crucial. I did not want any automatic signal to go beyond my control. All the equipment was connected to a familiar control application. I use it regularly to check safety systems. I was not creating a fire. I was setting up a scenario that looked like a drill gone wrong. No flames, no explosion, no one placed in real danger. The only thing activated was the natural reaction of people around when they see signs of something abnormal. When I turned off the light in my study and walked up the stairs, I did not think about what was about to happen. I was certain of only one thing. When everything began, it would unfold in a way that no one could say it was a premeditated plan. The trap was in the right position, and all that remained was to wait for the moment. Part 9. I did not go to work that day. I parked the car in a small lot at the end of the road, where the line of trees was thick enough to block the view from the house, but still let me see the front gate clearly. I had sat in this spot many times before, on different days, just to observe. Not stalking, but memorizing the rhythm of daily life. Who arrived first? Who went in after? How long until the door closed? How long until the curtains were drawn? At exactly 9:28, Lucas's car turned in. Not early, not late. I glanced at my watch and then back at the house. The gap between those two looks was already familiar. He entered through the side door, as always. No doorbell, no hesitation. The way he moved showed the ease of someone who believed he was in the right place at the right time. Elaine arrived a few minutes later. I did not need to see it to picture it. What followed had replayed in my mind enough times over the past weeks. I knew how she set her bag down. I knew the tone of her voice when she called his name. I even knew the familiar rhythm of their steps as they went upstairs. I sat still in the car, no music, no phone calls. I just let time pass. 30 minutes. That number was not a guess. It came from many previous observations. From the moment Lucas entered the house until all movement outside completely died down. From when the bedroom curtains were pulled shut until the house settled into a very specific kind of silence. During that span, I imagined them meeting. The low voices, the sweet words they believed only the two of them could hear. I imagined an intimacy that should never have been allowed to exist between a mother and her son-in-law. The touches, the acts that crossed boundaries they convinced themselves did not apply because they were meant for each other. I knew that in those moments, skin met skin. Body temperature rose. The environment became damp and slightly alkaline. All the conditions I had calculated began to converge. The adhesive did not activate immediately. It required friction. It required movement. And they created that themselves. I pictured the first instant when something felt wrong. A vague resistance, then a reflexive movement. That very movement locked everything in place. A scream rang out. Even from inside the car, I could hear it. Not the words, but enough to recognize it was not a normal sound. It was the sound of pain erupting when the body realized something had gone beyond control. My chest tightened. Part of me wanted to get out, to turn away, to pretend I had never understood what was happening. But the other part, the one that had endured countless silent nights and irrefutable proof, knew everything was unfolding exactly as planned. I checked my watch again. 9:59. I took out my phone. My fingers did not shake, but my palm was slick with sweat. I opened the control app, the one I had used hundreds of times for safety tests. Every device showed ready status. I drew a slow breath, then activated it. First, the house fire alarm, an internal alert loud enough for the neighbors to hear. Next, the smoke generator. White smoke began to seep from the door frames, thickening just enough to draw attention from outside. Finally, I turned on the speakers. The sound that came out was not clear speech, but fragmented, panicked cries for help, enough for anyone listening to know that someone inside was in danger. I set the phone down on the passenger seat. In that moment, I felt no victory. No relief either. I only knew that the final gear had been pushed into place. What came next no longer belonged solely to me or to them. The community would respond. Emergency services would arrive. Lights would turn on. And the truth, the thing they had tried to keep sealed behind closed doors, was about to step outside. Smoke began to spread through the hallway in a very slow, very even way. It did not erupt violently. It simply crawled along the ceiling and then poured down the staircase, just enough for anyone outside to catch an unfamiliar smell and stop to observe. The house alarm rang in a steady, drawn-out rhythm, not shrill but relentless, like a reminder that something was happening inside. The sound coming from the speaker system was not coherent speech, just ragged breathing and broken cries, unmistakably panicked. That sound pierced through the glass doors, carried out into the front yard, and drifted toward neighboring houses. A door opened. Then a few more people stepped onto their porches. Some stood watching. Some instinctively raised their phones. The gathering of eyes happened faster than I expected. Someone called emergency services. Sirens appeared only minutes later. Rotating lights swept across the facade, casting blue and red flashes over the crowd forming in front of the house. First responders stepped out of their vehicles with equipment, exchanged quick words, then moved straight inside. When no clear response came from within, a decision was made immediately. The front door was forced open with just enough strength, not chaotic, but decisive. Smoke poured out more visibly, and the alarm sounded sharper as the space was breached. "Someone's upstairs," a voice said. The response team split up, one group checking the lower floor while the other headed straight for the stairs. My daughter arrived with them. I saw her standing on the steps, a rescue jacket thrown on hastily, hair tied back neatly, her face focused with professional instinct. She listened to the briefing quickly, nodded, then immediately ran up the stairs, her steps firm and without hesitation. The bedroom door at the end of the hallway was ajar. When it was pushed open, the hallway light flooded in, exposing everything inside with no room left to hide. Elaine and Lucas were there, in a state that rendered any explanation meaningless. They were stuck together, panicked and clumsy, unable to separate and unable to cover themselves. Every small movement made them freeze again in sharp pain. My daughter stopped dead in the doorway. It took her a few seconds to comprehend what she was seeing. Then her lips began to tremble. Tears spilled out quickly, impossible to hide. She raised a hand to cover her mouth by reflex, as if letting it drop would cause everything to shatter. "Mom!" Her voice came out small and unsteady. "Why?" Elaine turned her head, her face drained of color when she saw her daughter standing there. Her gaze swept over the responders, over the uniforms, then stopped at her daughter's tear-filled eyes. She opened her mouth, but no words came fast enough. Lucas spoke first. He stammered, trying to piece sentences together, his voice breaking apart. "It's not what you think. Let me explain. It was just an accident." Every word he spoke only made the situation more pitiful. He tried to shift by instinct, then froze again in pain, sweat beading on his forehead. There was no way out of that position, and no way to preserve even a shred of dignity. My daughter shook her head repeatedly. Tears fell onto the floor, each drop clearly visible. "I don't understand. I don't understand what's happening." Her voice broke on the last word. The room sank into a heavy silence. No one needed to ask another question. No one needed to speculate. The truth lay bare before everyone's eyes, requiring no explanation. Outside in the hallway, neighbors had moved closer. Phones were raised high. Flashing lights continued to blink. Whispers began to spread. Some recognized Elaine. Some recognized Lucas. Some only needed a glance to piece together the entire story. Reputations collapsed right there, in that very house. My daughter took a deep breath. She wiped her tears with the back of her hand, forcing herself back into her familiar role. Her voice trembled but remained clear as she ordered preparation of a treatment solution and requested additional medical support. Every instruction followed protocol, but her eyes could not hide the shock. Elaine lowered her head. Lucas did not dare look at anyone. Both were minimally covered for safety, but nothing could conceal the looks that had already seen, the videos that had already been recorded, the gossip that had already begun. When the stretcher was brought up, when they were led outside under the gaze of the entire neighborhood, I stood silently at a distance. My chest tightened when I saw my daughter turn her face away, her shoulders trembling as she cried. I hurt, the way a father hurts when he sees his child's trust torn apart. But I also told myself one thing very clearly. She needed to know. This truth, however brutal, was still better than living inside a prolonged lie. Better to suffer once and be done with it than to let her keep standing in the dark. The stage was fully set, and from that moment on, everything they had tried to hide was dragged into the light, before the community, before the cameras, and before the one person they never imagined they would have to face in this way. I drove to the hospital immediately after that. My daughter was in the treatment area when I arrived. She was leaning against the counter, a lab coat thrown over her rescue uniform, her eyes red, but her composure barely intact. When she saw me, she stepped forward, hugged me quickly, then let go, as if afraid she would fall apart if she leaned on me any longer. "Dad, I heard everything," she said softly. "I don't understand it at all." I placed my hand on her shoulder and gave it a gentle squeeze. "I know," I replied. "I don't either." I said nothing more. I let her cry for a while. Tears fell quietly without sound. I stood there like a father who could only stay close, unable to fix what had already happened. In that moment, I allowed myself to look broken, as if I, too, had only just learned the truth. Elaine and Lucas were taken into two separate areas, divided by a privacy partition. After initial treatment, the doctor ordered further observation before transferring them to recovery rooms. Protocol required them to remain close in distance, yet separated enough that they would not have to face each other. I went to see Elaine first. She lay on the bed, eyes swollen, hair disheveled. When she saw me, tears spilled over again. She tried to sit up, her hands trembling, her voice breaking from the very first sentence. I didn't know everything would turn out like this," she said, sobbing. "Maybe it's my age. I'm going through changes. Over 50, perimenopause. My thoughts were all tangled. I never meant to betray you." She spoke nonstop, as if afraid that the moment she stopped, I would walk away. "You're always so busy. Your health hasn't been good either. I didn't want to worry you. I thought it was just a moment of weakness. Please forgive me." I stood still and listened to everything. My chest tightened, not because of her excuses, but because of the desperation in her voice. I answered slowly, every word clear. "I'm in pain because you betrayed me," I said. "But what hurts more than anything is that you betrayed your own daughter." Elaine choked back a sob. She turned her face away, unable to say another word. I stepped to the other side of the partition. Lucas lay there, his face drained, his eyes avoiding mine. When he saw me standing at his bedside, he forced himself up slightly, his voice hoarse. "I'm sorry," he said. "I was wrong. I didn't think everything—" I raised my hand, signaling him to stop. "You don't need to say anything else," I said evenly. "You betrayed me. You betrayed this family. Nothing you say now will change that." He lowered his head. No more words were spoken. I stepped back out into the hallway. As I had just entered the corridor, the on-call doctor called after me, his voice quick but still steady with professional rhythm. He said they needed additional basic antiseptic, the kind used for sensitive skin, to complete the final step before transferring both patients to observation rooms. At that moment, the nurses and orderlies were busy tending to several other patients. I stopped and turned around. "I'll get it," I said. "Everyone here knows me." The doctor nodded. In this hospital, I was a familiar face. I went straight to the supply counter. Instead of requesting the basic antiseptic for sensitive areas, I clearly asked for the type used for deeper treatment, the strongest one meant for thorough sterilization. The staff member checked the label, glanced it over quickly, then handed it to me. The packaging was almost identical to the standard one, differing only in a few lines of small printed specifications. At a glance, no one would easily notice the difference. I took the bag of medication and headed back. My steps were steady, not rushed, not hesitant. 2 nurses received the bag from me and nodded in thanks. The treatment room door was closed according to protocol. The doctor asked everyone to step outside to ensure proper procedure. The hallway grew quiet, leaving only distant footsteps and the steady hum of machines at the far end of the wing. I stood a few steps away from the door. Inside, the treatment began. The antiseptic was applied to the areas requiring care. Then a scream erupted, not a short one. At first, it was my wife. A moment later, my son-in-law. High, sharp sounds, breaking out as an involuntary reaction to sudden pain. The screams slammed against the door and echoed into the hallway, causing a few passers-by to slow and glance over. The on-call doctor looked toward the door, frowning out of professional habit. He spoke, his tone still calm, that of someone accustomed to handling sensitive cases. "Antiseptic in that area usually stings. Just endure it for a bit. Once it's done, you can be transferred to recovery." He did not know the solution being used was stronger than normal, because I had switched it. The groans continued, sometimes breaking, sometimes piling on, then flaring up again. No one opened the door. The procedure continued. Those inside had no choice but to grit their teeth and endure, knowing that at this moment there was no alternative except to wait until it was over. I stood still, my hands relaxed at my sides. I knew the sensation of antiseptic touching those areas must have been searing, but that pain could not compare to what the 2 of them had inflicted on me and on my daughter. Yet I also knew that some consequences are only truly understood when one is forced to confront the feeling firsthand. No avoidance, no softening. I returned to my daughter and placed my hand on her shoulder again, this time more slowly. "It will pass," I said quietly. "I'm here." She nodded. The tears had stopped, but her eyes were still deeply exhausted, and I knew this silence was only a prelude. The lights of truth were about to switch fully on. When that happened, no one would be able to pretend they had never understood what was really going on. The nurse announced that everything had been handled. Elaine and Lucas were stable enough to be moved to private rooms, each in a different direction. The gurney wheels rolled slowly across the floor, the sound of metal against tile echoing clearly through the now sparsely populated hallway. I stepped forward half a pace. "Wait," I said. My voice was not loud, but firm enough to stop all movement. "Before they're moved, I have something that needs to be said." The doctor turned to look at me. I nodded, calm and steady. "Just a few minutes," I said. "The people involved are waiting outside." He motioned for the nurse to stop the gurney. No one asked another question. The hallway doors opened. The women walked in. They had been here since I was admitted. Waiting. Sitting silently on the row of chairs against the wall, files neatly resting on their laps. Margaret led the way, followed by two others. None of them looked at me first. They looked straight at Lucas. He recognized them immediately, his face drained of color. His throat moved as if swallowing something too dry. Elaine turned, froze. Her eyes moved from one face to another, lingering longest on Margaret, as if desperately searching for an explanation. The police officers had been standing at the edge of the hallway the entire time. They did not intervene. They only observed. I stepped into the white light. "I think," I said slowly, "before anyone goes anywhere, there are a few things that need to be made clear. Here." Margaret opened her briefcase. She did not need to look at the papers when she spoke. Her voice was steady but hoarse. "We were with him," she said, "not just once." She took a deep breath, then continued, as if determined to finish everything in one go. "He told me I was the only one, said his marriage existed in name only. I believed him. I did. I let him stay with me, slept with him, gave him money because I thought I was helping the man I loved get through a hard time." The second woman stepped forward, her hand gripping her bag strap tightly. "Me too," she said. "He stayed at my place, ate the dinners I cooked, slept in my bed, then asked for money. Every time he said it was the last time. I'm not stupid. I didn't think I was being used." The last woman set her folder down, her voice trembling but clear. "We're not here to tell humiliating stories. We're here because today we learned the truth, and because we don't want anyone else to become a victim." The amounts were read out. 40,000, 35,000, 20-something thousand. Bank transfers, cash, dates, promises. Everything aligned like puzzle pieces that had been waiting all along. Elaine shook her head over and over. Her eyes widened, then dropped. "No, that can't be," she whispered. "You told me something different." Margaret turned to Elaine, her gaze not angry, only tired. "He told you the same things he told all of us," she replied. "The only difference is that you are in a more advantageous position." No further explanation was needed. I signaled. The recording was played. The voice echoed through the hospital hallway, clear and cold. Every calculated sentence, every step of dosage division, every timeline marker, the words about insurance, about signatures, about a gentle push to slowly weaken a body. No one interrupted. No one even cleared their throat. The space felt tightly sealed. Elaine stood completely still. When the recording reached the part with her voice, her eyes went wide. Her lips moved, but no sound came out. Her arms fell limp. Her entire body seemed drained of strength. Every apology, every justification she had offered earlier shattered on the spot, without anyone needing to refute them. Lucas tried to sit up. I raised my hand. "Enough!" One of the officers stepped forward a single pace. His question was short and direct. "What was the ultimate goal?" Lucas stayed silent. His shoulders collapsed. That silence was heavy enough that no further question was required. The decision was made right there in the hallway. A formal investigation was opened into organized fraud and conspiracy to cause harm. The transfer to private rooms was suspended. All procedures shifted in a different direction. Elaine sank down onto a chair. She turned instinctively to look for her daughter. The girl stood farther away, her hands clutching the hem of her shirt, eyes red but no longer crying. That look was enough for Elaine to understand. Some things, once lost, cannot be begged back. The women stood side by side. No one said anything more. But in that silence, one thing was unmistakably clear. The truth had finally been spoken, and the shame no longer remained confined to separate houses. I stepped back, giving space to the next procedures. I did not seek anyone's eyes. I only saw my daughter take a deep breath and straighten her back. From that moment on, this was no longer a family matter. It had entered files, testimony, and accountability before the law. There was no celebration afterward. No one raised a glass. Everything returned to the proper course of the law, slow but certain. Elaine lost her marriage first. The divorce was finalized within a few weeks, with no prolonged dispute. When the case file was cross-checked against the recordings and testimony, her role was clearly established. The trial was held behind closed doors, following due process. The court handed down a suspended sentence of 3 years, with a probation period of 5 years, judicial supervision, and a restraining order prohibiting her from approaching my daughter for 36 months. There was no room left for excuses, only responsibility and the obligation to comply with every condition. Lucas bore the heavier punishment. The chain of fraud was proven through bank statements, timelines, and corroborating testimony. The verdict was announced publicly: 7 years of imprisonment, full restitution of all stolen funds, asset seizure to enforce the judgment, and a prohibition against contacting the victims for 5 years after completing his sentence. Once the ruling took effect, his former life closed completely. My daughter also finalized her divorce. The decision was not easy, but it was necessary. She chose a clean break so she would not continue living in the shadow of lies. The court approved protective measures, with clear terms and firmly drawn boundaries. From that day on, she no longer had to guess where the truth stood. As for me, there were no lengthy interrogations. I placed the truth on the table and stepped back. The rest belonged to the law. In the months that followed, life slowly found its rhythm again. We ate simple meals and spoke only what was necessary. I stayed close, without pressure, just accompanying her. My daughter slept more peacefully. The fatigue in her eyes eased. The house returned to what it was meant to be. I dismantled the things I had once used to stay on guard. Every action was deliberate, meant to close a chapter. The quiet was no longer heavy. It became comfortable. I did not win because I was smarter than them. I won because I saw the truth sooner and did not turn away. The two of them received sentences for what they had done. My daughter and I reclaimed our peace. Thank you for staying until the final line. Thank you for listening to a story that was not easy, but needed to be told. Your presence here is something I value. If this story touched you, leave a single dot. If you want to continue alongside stories of family, truth, and justice, follow the channel. I am grateful that you are here.